Well, welcome everybody to another in the continuing series of the Sustainability Lecture Series here at the university. I see we have a lot of community members here tonight, so I want to remind you that we have a sustainability lecture here every Wednesday night at this time. We have another EVST professor here to introduce Brock. I think most of you probably already know Neva Hassanine, but if you don't, and maybe some of the new students might not have met her yet. Oh, she's having fun with the lights over there. We determined that this was an adequate amount of light while still being able to see the screen very well here. She has focused, since she's been in Missoula, primarily on empowering local communities to build sustainable food systems, but she also has a background in toxics and in general community organizing and environmental sociology, and I know that a lot of you students will enjoy very much when you take her classes later on. So I'm going to turn it over to Neva now so that she can introduce Brock.
Hi, good evening. I'm so glad you all came out. Last year I was at Bozeman for the Pioneers Conference. They do a satellite around the country to different communities, and they project the plenary talks that are happening at the main conference at Pioneers, which is in San Rafael, California. And I've been to the main conference a couple times, and the plenary talks are just usually amazing. And there's a couple thousand people in this huge hall, and the vibe and energy is really terrific and interesting and always inspiring. And so last year when I was in Bozeman, they were beaming in via satellite a couple of talks, including Brock Dolman. And I just was completely impressed by his ability to communicate about the value of water and the whole hydrologic cycle from the globe to your rooftop. And so he's going to talk about that tonight, Basins of Relations, thinking like a watershed. Brock is the co-founder and co-owner of the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, which is in Sonoma County in Northern California. And also a participant in the Sewing Circle Intentional Community, which has been going since the early 90s. And it takes a lot of work to live in community, and he's learned a lot about that as well. And maybe if we run out of water questions to ask him about later, we can talk to him about what it's like to live in intentional community, and got some folks experimenting with that here as well. He's the director of the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's Water Institute and their permaculture program. A person could go there and take courses in permaculture. Since 1995, under Brock's direction, the permaculture program has become nationally recognized as an important educational site and innovative demonstration center. He's presented at numerous conferences, not only at Pioneers, but Eco Farm, which is sort of the leading organic conference that's held every year in Asilomar, California, Green Prints, Hopes, and Soul Fest. And he's also lectured internationally in Costa Rica, Brazil, and China. I think when we were communicating with him this fall, he was somewhere in the Caribbean. I can't remember which. St. Croix. Yeah, he lives a tough life, but actually, despite his travel, he's someone who's very rooted in a particular place and has a lot to teach us. So thank you for coming out, and won't you welcome Brock Dolman to Missoula.
All right. Is that good? Can you hear me? Higher up? How's that? Yeah? How you feeling? What's up? Missoula. All right. Well, thanks for the introduction there, Neva, and thanks you for having this. And Gina especially over there, who I've known from California and interacted with, and for another initial invite to get me out here. I feel pretty comfy in the Intermountain West here. My family all comes out of Idaho, Montana. My grandmother grew up in Circle, Montana on a big cattle ranch out there, so in the Heidi family, and spent a lot of my time as a kid out here. And our family cabin is just in Island Park on just south of the west entrance to Yellowstone there in Idaho side of things. So it's nice to come up here and feel this side of the part of the continent. Is, you know, the coast of California's got its own beauty for sure. So here's my thought. I'm going to do a quick introduction just to give you a couple images to the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, again, which is this 80-acre piece of land that I co-own with 11 people in an intentional community known as Sowing Circle, and which is some of the folks. We all live in various structures. It's a residential community, so there's different houses on the property. There's a dozen homes in different structures and buildings, and we have meeting rooms, and half our power comes off the photovoltaics there, and there's kids and families and staff members, and there's 25 folks who live on site in different capacities, and we've been doing that since '94, so it's our 17th year of trying to figure that piece of the game out. And I literally live with a bunch of clowns, as far as I can tell. We have a whole theater arts program. We have school garden teacher training programs, intentional community programs, the permaculture, the biointensive organic gardening. We're the 7th oldest certified organic farm in the state of California. This property was called the Farallons Institute in the early 70s, and the beginnings of California certified organic farmers comes out of this piece of land. And if anybody does biointensive gardening, you may know the work of a guy named Alan Chadwick. And we also live in an intentional community with a whole bunch of other life forms. And so in my world as a biologist, as a junior Darwin overachiever, for me, intentional community has to be engaged with all species of all life forms for all generations, right? All kingdoms of life. And so these are just some fun creatures and critters that we share the land with there. Different kinds of things, and you know, we don't have the grizz in California, but we got some beautiful bobcats and we got mountain lions. We don't have wolves, but it would be nice to. The gardens there are fairly well known. They're small. They're 3 acres of organic, again biointensive. This double dug Alan Chadwick type idea, but really diverse, crazy diverse. We're a seed saving garden. One of the main things that happens there is, if we're going to save seed, we need healthy plants, and to have healthy plants, you got to have healthy soil. So what's really been being grown on that farm since the early 70s has actually been soil, a living soil food web, right? There's the raw textures, sand, silt, and clay, and then there's the structure of soil, which is life collaborating and creating that form. And so soil is really where it's at. Because if you're looking to, we have about 3,000 varieties of open pollinated heirloom vegetables, herbs, flowers, medicinal plants, fruits, all kinds of things. It's kind of like a Noah's Ark for that. And it stands, to some degree, it's probably the most political thing we do, I think, is actually seed saving. At least Monsanto perceives it that way, as a threat to their perceived control and domination as a corporate entity that's going to hybridize and corporatize and genetically engineer and terminate our technology. The very commonwealth of people all over the planet who've been in a relationship with, as cultivators with cultivars of plants through time. And so saving seed and local varieties and keeping those genetics alive in your relationship with them is a profound act of food security, if anything else. And if you're going to have food security, you've got to have water security. And I'll move into water for the majority of the talk. But this is our pond at OAC. It's a runoff pond. It fills up in the wintertime. It's 6 acre-feet of water. Anybody want to tell me how many gallons are in an acre-foot? Got an acre, 12 inches of water on it. Anybody want to tell me how many square feet are in an acre?
42,000.
Nice, right? So then I'm going to stack 12 inches on that. I'm going to get cubic feet. If you do the math, it ends up about 326,000 gallons of water roughly. So there's about 2 million gallon water tank up there that fills up in the winter. And if we didn't have a pond, 100% of the irrigation for the entire farm comes from the gravity-fed irrigation off of this pond into the farm. So no pond, no food. No water, no food. Food security, where I come from at least, there's a relationship to those two things, and water's a really big deal in all over the planet, but certainly in Mediterranean dry parts of California for sure. I think probably everywhere, but did you have a thought there where I transition?
How much rainfall do you have there?
We average 60 inches. All right, 60 inches. We've had several 100-inch years, and in the 70s we had a 22-inch year. We've been in the 40s. So it's a highly variable system. And I'll get back to those numbers. They become important later. So anyway, this is my thought here, is the topic really then drilling down into this notion of what I call these basins of relations, and I'll get into watersheds more, and the notion of how do you think like a Montana watershed, or pick your watershed. And so there's a bit of a, let's just say, there's aquaponics, and then when I'm talking about water, it's broquaponics. So I hope to abuse the semantics of this event tonight. Play with language. You guys should play with language more. Hopefully you do. So I run this Water Institute, which you can see is an acronym here. So I'm really interested in watersheds and how do we advocate, train, educate, research, and do restoration on behalf of, ultimately, for water. And really quickly to disavow of a mythology, if you believe that this entity here is known as planet Earth, you should rethink it. It's really planet water. We're spending all kind of money and time looking all over the place right now with our telescopes and our little widgets that we fly out there, right, to look for water. We're spending bank on Mars right now. We're so excited. We had a little bit of frozen water. Everybody's all happy recently, right, because we found some frozen crystallized water on the dark side of the moon. And you immediately see in the paper they're talking about, oh, we've got a sustainable supply of water and we'll be able to get our moon base established. And I'm like, dude, you can't even manage the water budget over here. How do you think you're going to manage a water budget on the moon, right? We live on the most amazing planet. It's a water planet. 70% of the surface area of this living being is water, right? It's the oceans. If you take the total volume of water on the planet, then you're going to get 97% of the water on the planet is in the oceans. 2% would be in the poles, in the glaciers, in the really deep groundwater, the fossil groundwater, and then 1% basically of the water on the planet is fresh water, annually cycling through the water cycle, through the hydrologic cycle. And interestingly, in the post-industrial era which we're living in, the Anthropocene, as it's newly called, right? Anthro-human, from right? Geologically, we've got a new era, the human era, the Anthropocene. We've polluted half of that 1%. So we're playing with 50% of the deal here, of 1% out of the whole quantity, the volume of water. For those of all you guys who've had chemistry and such, or basic biology, you pretty much understand, right, that water's a molecule, right? It's got 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, and I generally like to think of it as this magic Mickey Mouse molecule. It's got 2 hydrogen ears up here, it's got an oxygen face down here, plus charges up on the hydrogens, a little negative charge down there. It's a polar molecule, right? It's bipolar. Bipolar, I always thought recently was a real estate opportunity in the Arctic, but maybe not. Right? Imagine a molecule that has a plus and a negative charge on it, which means it does amazing things. Like really amazing things. Like as a solid little hexagonal, 6-sided crystalline substance, as that solid, it floats on its liquid self. So you got a molecule that's a solid, a liquid, and a gas, all within temperature ranges conducive to life. I could hit this solid with sunlight and make it go straight to a gas without becoming a liquid, called sublimation. Right? A solid that floats on its liquid self. If ice sank, all bets would be off. Y'all wouldn't be here. Life wouldn't be here as we know it. Something else would be here, but we wouldn't be here. This is a really important game, and I'm going to get a lot more into this concept of phase state change. I think it becomes about the most important thing to really understand the thermal relationships around that. There was a recent poll out like a couple years ago that asked Americans to name one part of the water cycle. 50% of people, when asked that question, basically were silent. They couldn't say ocean, cloud, snow, river, groundwater, evapotranspiration, tree sweat. So the level of hydrological illiteracy in our country at the level of 50% silence on even being able to say anything about this should concern you. It's job security for me as a water-based educator, because look at the market share I've got of hydrologically illiterate people, right? It's like, the fun part about water is there's this tantric aphorism that says that form is the envelope of pulsation. Form follows function is a classic mantra that's out there, and you can flip it over. Function follows form, and form follows function. It's a big, ultimately a infinity sign, and this was just a fun image I picked up from a storm we got back in '08. Here's Hawaii, right? Here's the coast of California. And these things are washed out. That's why I was looking for a little more darkness. And we're getting what in California we call the Pineapple Express, which is the storms that come up to us from the south, and it's a lot of hot tropical water. But this volute here was just really cool. I just love that pattern that sets up. And so when you look to water, for me at the basic level of just trying to understand, do y'all know anything about biomimicry? Check out a book by a woman named Janine Benyus. Biomimicry. It's a whole new field, and people are really researching how does life do things, and can we mimic that for energy production or technology or fabric manufacture, things like that. So hydromimicry is a lot of what I'm really interested in this realm. So what do you think we got here? Right, you got a satellite image. You got snow up on the mesas above the Grand Canyon. Or is it a satellite image at the mouth of the Mississippi Delta? Or is it a scanning electron micrograph of the capillary bed at the end of your finger, the neural pathways in your brain? Or is this one lobe of your lung in your bronchial pulmonary alveoli system? Or in fact, is it just looking into a Costa Rican rainforest tree? Tree, nice. That was my treatise, right? Here's the deal. At every scale, from watersheds to deltas to trees to brains to blood to lungs, form follows function, and water is the lubricant of life and the driver of form at every scale. I'm supporting y'all should hang out and study water. This molecule does miraculous things on the planet, and it's really worth tripping on. Are you literate in the landscape? Can you read the calligraphy and how water and earth write and talk to each other in cursive on the landscape? What is a sinuously serpentine, slightly supple, tortuously meandering geofluvial morphological expression in a valley bottom? And do you understand the relationship between depositional and erosional forces in a balanced hydrologic system that's moving water and minerals and geology out to the ocean? And that pattern actually is the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is not a straight line. And any Army Corps engineers, Army Corps of Engineer people in the house? Good, I can rip on those guys then. No. In an older generation of folks who perceived that the quickest way to develop this property was to just basically take this creek and make it go straight into a trapezoidal channel, right? You know these little channels, flood control channels. And that was perceived to be the most efficient path of least resistance, and it's the path of optimum desiccation, right? But this is least resistance. This is balancing erosion and deposition over time. That's what the land and water wants to do with each other over time. And so water's an amazing thing because it moves and it flows, and then it can be still, and you can reflect on it. And the fun part about water at some level is that you could understand water to be a noun. If I'm talking about the language of this landscape here, ecological literacy, if you're literate in the landscape, then metaphorically the noun part, right, a thing, you can ski on it, kayak on it, surf on it, drink it, take a bath in it, right? It's a thing. But if you really think about it, it's actually as well a verb because there's a cycle, there's a flow. Remember I was saying there's the total volume of water on the planet was split up into these three phase states, 97 ocean, 2 in the caps, poles, groundwater, and then the 1 is the freshwater cycling. The fun part about thinking about water is that there's a relationship between what state the water is in on the planet at any one time, and we'll get back to that, or we'll come back to that in a second here. But there's also a sense that, in essence, the water, all the water that's on the planet right now is all the water we've had for 4 billion years. It's absolutely finite in its total volume. It's an absolutely finite resource. But, really differently than finite resources like fossil fuels, right, oil and gas and coal, which are truly finite, the coolest thing about something like water is that because it's based on a cycle, it's infinitely present in our life because annually it's renewed based on whatever the contribution that wet season gives to you. So in an average year, my allowance that Gaia gives to me in a winter in Occidental is 60 inches. That's infinitely renewed on an annual basis, although it's variable. So it's a really different deal, right? You get this nuance of the game I'm playing there. It's infinitely finite. And the beauty of it is that in essence, when it boils down to it, the water cycle and the life cycle are the same dang cycle, because no water, no life. And I'm a biologist by birth. I came out the womb kicking and screaming for creepy, crawly, venomous, spiny, slimy organisms, and chased them as a kid and learned how to go to college and get a degree and make a living doing that, right? I come to water as a biologist because if you don't understand water, then how can you understand life? Because by volume, everything out there that's living is mostly water. And when you look at what human behavior does, when you look at energy production and manufacturing and food production and the relationship to energy, water is embedded at the foundation of the footprint of all these human behaviors. What's the water footprint of this table? How many gallons did it take from source to sink to make this? It's a lot. It's what we call virtual water. It's invisible water. What did it take from source to sink? And water's embedded in everything. And the cool thing is that all living organisms on the planet by volume are mostly water. And that's true for hopefully you all. The younger you are, a small baby pushes 80% water by volume. Right? And the older you get, the less by water you are, and death is a function of dehydration. So I wish I had some water up here, to be honest with you, and I would propose a toast. Because I'm actually thirsty. Is there a little, I don't know if anyone's got a cup or a water bottle. But you should stay hydrated is the take-home message here. After air, water is by far the most important thing you take into you. Food is 3 minutes without air, you're bummed. 3 days without water, you're bummed. And 3 weeks without food, I could use to lose a few. Food security is 3 orders of magnitude further away than air security. And you all know it when you have an inversion in this valley. Asthma rates in all kinds of urban communities trump food security by orders of magnitude. And water's before that. So maybe you're like, dude, chill a little bit here. But let's get blunt about the reality of what is, where does this stuff sort out? Right? As somebody who studies water, to be honest with you, my mentor in studying water is Beaver. It is the most amazing, most intelligent, most articulate hydroengineer the planet has ever evolved. I got beaver fever super bad. Right? And the other thing about water that I find interesting is I got to go on a trip to China and eastern Tibet last year for 2 months. And we were making a movie and doing a book, and I was doing the photography for a film on visiting sacred Tibetan Buddhist headwater shrines and water temples in the Himalaya at the sources where the water comes out. And it was quite amazing. And you show up at these limestone caves and these beautiful rivers of water coming out, and you go inside the cave for half a mile, and there's just these temples and flags and incense burning and monks in there like, right? And just resonating inside these caves. It's an impressive experience. And then all around the little creeks and things, as you drive around, you see these little mini huts here. And some of them just have little barrels. That's like maybe like a 55-gallon drum or so, about that big. And what they have is a little water-powered prayer wheel. There's a little paddle wheel there that they divert some water and they spin it. And they've just got these prayer wheels going inside of these little houses, just emanating prayers, Buddhist. Thank you. Okay, now we can propose a toast. All right, drink up, people. That's helpful. I mean, ultimately, I guess what I was most interested in is the level at which there is a reverence for water there that is highly visible. And I think in America we've got a deep reverence for water as well, right? We've got this deep connection to its importance in our life and this really honoring of the sacred substance. And I guess if the solution to pollution is dilution, then having some pure water nearby is a good thing if you're going to get a jelly donut down the gullet, right? It's a good business model. If you perceive that the stability of your future will be based on some sort of corporation providing you some purified water because you've allowed the watershed to be trashed, because you've fallen prey to a fallacious filtration fetish, and you think it's going to be given to you in a bottle from somewhere, from France in this instance, right? I would support you and recognize you may be a tad bit, right? The marketers at Evian are super clear that if you naively are willing to pay them 3,000% on average more for bottled water than what's coming out of the tap, and for the most part in most municipal taps, which is actually a regulated substance versus bottled water, which isn't, the quality of the water you get, if you don't trust your tap, then participate in democracy with your water board to fix your watershed up. You have the opportunity at least to have some semblance of control there. Over here you don't. And take your pick of where you want to spend your money. The watershed ultimately is really this whole relational entity. It's like if you cupped your hands and you could see the ring around your thumb and forefingers as the watershed divide, and these were little creeklets here, and here's a river and the delta's out at your wrists, and you created that cup, that container. Well, that's basically what every bit of every landscape on the planet has been sculpted into these geologically uplifted and eroded water shedding, redelivering forms on the planet. And there's the headwaters and the middle reaches, and then all the way down here, and maybe there's forestry and ranching and grazing and agriculture and suburbs and urban, or however your system lays out. And you got to figure it out, because the beauty of it is that the health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. So you tell me, it'll be interesting to see. How many of you all have a creek nearby or somewhere that you're willing to go get on your hands and knees and drink straight out of with no filters, no nothing? Really? I figure we get a couple more out of this crowd. California, this is what I usually expect, not a hand up. Ask your grandparents that question. I'll bet if we swap the room out here, it'd be a whole lot more. So watching the level of number of hands go down in just a generation or two of people who are not even willing to drink surface water is an indictment of your human settlement pattern, right? Right? If you think, or if you're willing to go with me on the notion that you live on planet water, and that the health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the planet, and you see this tempestuous being here, and you're like, okay, we're dealing with this whole realm, bunch of names for it. Climate change, global warming. I'm mostly a fan of the phrase global weirding, which is really what's going to go down. And you don't need the scientists to tell you it's happening, right? It's pretty evident out there that this is all happening, right? It doesn't... Right? It don't take much. And I was in Brazil in 2008, and I can tell you the bathing suits on Ipanema Beach are a lot smaller than that. So in 2010, it would appear the naked truth of the matter is game on. Right? We've been airing our dirty laundry or clean laundry long enough. And if you study the work, and this is 2007, but these statements haven't changed at all. This Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this group of 2,000 scientists from all over the world that were given the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore. They were given a peace prize. It wasn't a science prize. It was a peace prize. Pretty clear that world peace hinges on us getting climate change, sorting it out. And so this notion that warming of the system is unequivocal. In the science world, that means greater than the 90th percentile of confidence interval for them to use that word. That word has rigor to it, right? That it's evident from these observations that we have an increase in the global average air and ocean temperature and this widespread melting of snow and ice, and this rise in global mean sea level. What does every fundamental indicator of climate change have in common? It's a water-based indicator. It's got to be. It has no other choice than being that, right? Because if you live on a planet, what's anybody want to just give me a quickie on what is the operative driving physics and chemistry behind what global warming is responding to?
Carbon dioxide.
So we're combusting a series of plant-based products that were put away a long time ago, and with a ton of heat and pressure and temperature were converted into various forms, petroleum-based forms. But we're like pulling them out and we're combusting them. And the main byproduct of combustion, all combustion products produce what? All combustion processes produce what two products? H2O and CO2. So there's a water cycle piece to that, which is interesting and not even accounted for here. And then the CO2 floats up and it gets stuck in this atmosphere. And we're super happy that we've had an atmosphere up there with a certain amount of CO2 in it, right? And it's been variable over time for sure. Been pretty dang stable at 280 parts per million for a long time. And then the last 100 years, we first discovered oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859. Coal we'd been working for a little longer, right? And now we're up at about 390, 380 parts per million. So what that means to me is you're in bed, and I've got sunlight coming through, and it goes through this atmosphere, bounces off your bed, and it comes back out, and it gets stuck in the blanket up here. So you're laying out in the sun, and you got a blankie on you. And then I'm just going to put another blankie on you, i.e. more CO2 in the atmosphere, making it thicker, i.e. increasing the retention of the heat that passes through and bounces off. Greenhouse effect. Basic idea. If I keep putting blankets on you, and you're laying out trying to sunbathe, and I'm going to put another down blanket on you, what are you going to do to deal if you don't get to kick a leg out? I ain't letting you kick a leg out. You've got to just deal. What are you going to do? Come on, people, what are you going to do?
Sweat.
You got to sweat. Because you're going to change the phase state of water, in that case from a liquid to a gas. We know about evaporative cooling. You should all know about that. But experientially, I mean, you don't need to go to class to learn that one, right? The planet's going to do one thing first. It's going to take all the solid and turn it into a liquid, because that's a cooling reaction. So every scrap of solid water on this planet is destined to go away as part of the process of the planet trying to cool itself down from the increase in the retention of that heat because of this thickening blanket, because we've been putting all this gas up in the atmosphere. So the Arctic and the Antarctic are going away, and the Greenland ice shelf and this big thing that just cracked off, and all the glaciers all around, right? Right? The data's all in. And then it's going to go here. Oh, it's that, right? It didn't say rising global nice sea level. Right? So we're going to transfer it from solid to liquid, and that 97% ocean, 2% solid. The big winner in this game, in this round, is the ocean. The 2% is up for grabs, and the 1% is going to start cycling really fast, because as air temperature goes up, hot air holds more water vapor, right? Humidity. And that's going to move hot air from the tropics and make big old hurricanes and cyclones and typhoons, which is melting the poles even faster, right? Is that complicated, the physics on this? Because hopefully you don't see it. It's not that dang complicated. The planet's got no other choice to manage this, right? That's the only deal. That's the cool thing about water, I said, is it's a solid liquid gas, is that the change between phase states has a thermodynamic implication with respect to heat, giving heat off or absorbing heat. When there's condensation, it absorbs heat, right? If you move liquid back to solid, right? So it's a give and take in that realm. So when you see these kinds of maps and fantasies out there, and hopefully y'all can see this one. Here's your little lovely state. Here we are somewhere over here, right? And I love this one. These are the folks saying, peak oil is a bunch of hoo-ha because we got plenty of fossil fuels out there. We got, in just America alone, 673 years worth of energy, right? We've got 222 days worth if we just whack the northeast corner of your state and get into North Dakota there. Up here in the tar sands, 364 years worth of tar sands. I know you guys need a little road just through Idaho and Montana to make it happen, but whatever, right? You're committed. All right, here's the deal. The atmosphere ain't got 673 years worth more capacity to deal with the byproducts of the combustion, right? The oceans of this planet do not have 673 years worth of capacity to sequester the CO2 into the ocean water without becoming basically carbonic acid baths, right? Which is what's currently happening right now. You take the CO2, H2O, there's a whole big chemistry game here, and what you end up with is a decreasing pH in the ocean, i.e. it's becoming more acidic. And that's called ocean acidification. And as oceans get more acidic, all of the little critters that make their shells out of calcium, these little floating diatoms, plankton, all the corals, the foundations of the food web of the entire ocean, they can't do it anymore. And this data is already well out the gate. Go study this up. This isn't a future. I'm super not giving you a futuristic scenario here. I mean, there is one there, but climate change isn't like when it starts. We're like way down the game on this thing, right? So here, the thought is that what kills an alcoholic isn't that they run out of alcohol, it's that their liver quits being able to deal. Or smokers' lungs give out and they get lung cancer. What ends the game is the fouling of the nest. What sets the limit to carrying capacity will be the lack of atmospheric ability and oceanic ability to deal with the combustion byproducts of the addiction to fossil fuels. That's what sets the end game here, right? So the notion that even though you think we'll just keep discovering more and we've got hundreds and hundreds of years of coal out there, it's not going to work, right? And I'm so not interested in bumming you out, but my wife calls me a pre-paranoid. And the school that I come from, that I teach in permaculture, the mantra we're all about is called planning is best done in advance. Think about it. So as an advanced-based planner, I would like you to give me the data. I'll design a system accordingly. So you kind of want to actually see this one coming. I got to go into this part of the Himalaya over here in southwestern China, eastern Tibet. The trippy thing about, have you all heard of the Himalaya known as the third pole? People refer to it, there's the North Pole, the South Pole, and then there's the third pole, which is the Himalaya. And the interesting thing is that the Himalaya, we get the Indus River that going through Pakistan, we'll come back to it in a second, the Ganges through India into this delta here, where what's known as the Yarlung on this side through Tibet turns the corner and becomes the Brahmaputra through Bangladesh here, right? Then there's actually the Irrawaddy here. There's the Salween, the Mekong, the Yangtze, and the Yellow. There's 2 billion people's population-wise, 2 billion people's worth of water is coming out of that system there, and at the rate of melting in those systems, they're not looking like they're going to have ice in 50 years. And that population, where's the big growth curve in this? Oh, yeah. Tell me which of the populations on the planet are really going? And the water supply that drives the entire capacity to go there is basically about to dry up, right? And I got to go visit a whole bunch of glaciers. So this is my testimonial to you. Went to the site, saw some photos of this glacier here, and again, this lighting's really hard to see, but this is in the 20s, how big this glacier was. In the 70s, it was here, and last year, it's this little chunk right here. Everything those photos we're looking at, it's gone. It's all gone. You can talk to any Tibetan yak herder you want, and they don't have all the fancy science and all that stuff. They just can say, yeah, there's less ice. It's all going away. This is not a conspiracy of long-haired radicals and lefties trying to convince you that global weirding is some takeover of capitalist theory. I know Missoula is a smart college town, and you guys don't fall prey for that sort of stuff, but speaking from my own state of California, 80% of the water supply from our state comes from the snow that is captured, stored, and melts off of the Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada happens to be the longest contiguous mountain range in all the lower 48, right? It's a full 100 miles long. You got a bunch of little shorties here in the Intermountain West, but none as long as a unified crest. We get our highest spot, our lowest spot, biggest tree, right? I've ski bummed winters in Squaw Valley where we got 65 feet of snow, 760 inches of snow, and it's heavy, wet Sierra cement. It's not this super champagne powder, dry kind of, bitter root, Driggs, Wasatchy, fun stuff that you all get to ski in. We're like slogging through the slush, right? But it's water. Here's the deal. 80% of our water supply is due to basically, in 75 years, almost all of the climate models have concurrence that we very likely have many winters without hardly any snowpack at all, right? I don't know what your all's models are out here, but I know you're all basically snow melt dependent systems here. Every city in the Intermountain West has a big old reservoir of white frozen stuff somewhere co-located with a river system and probably some dams and reservoirs and then some groundwater that went in. I would support you in trying to track down what that scenario plays out for you. Oof, tough in this light. Here's San Francisco. If people know there, Golden Gate goes across here. Marin County is here. Sonoma County's up here where I live. So if you can see this dark edge, that's basically the current shoreline. This lighter stuff, I don't know if you can see this lighter stuff here. That's the new shoreline with a 1 meter sea level rise, which are the governor, right, in his radical Republican progressive way with his blue ribbon panel. Right. Point being here is folks who have of serious mainstream credential. The estimate at this point is this scenario here is a 75-year scenario. We're already up 8 inches under the Golden Gate in the last 50. Right? 1 meter is 39 inches. That's 39 at Sacramento, right? That's the current sea level projection. That's about a 60-year, 75-year game. Planning is best done in advance, right? Because as far as I can tell, there's going to be a lot more affordable housing in the future, right? Is that housing you have to ford through the water to get to? Is that affordable? Oh, I waded into that one, didn't I? It makes some critters wonder when the hominids are going to get it. You'll be safe to cross the lily pad at some point, right? So I probably got you to a point like, oh man, I want to get all inspired. What up? Here's the deal. If you're going to survive this uncertainty of the future with all of the predictions that appear to be fairly robust, then the folks who survive it got themselves into little lifeboats. And as far as I can tell, the lifeboat y'all are looking for is called your Watershed. Back to my little model here. This is a little boat, a little bitty boat. And from basically ridgeline to river mouth and stem to stern and summit to sea, you either figure out how to retrofit the land use, every human land use from the forestry, ranching, rural, intensive ag, extensive ag, suburban, urban, every human land use within your living lifeboat is up for a full rethink, a full retrofit towards the concept of being climate resilient. And I would argue that if you lead with water as the molecule, as the element that you design for, if the question is what would water want, and you design for that, your food system would be good, your energy system would be good, your transportation system would be good, your housing system would be good, the education system would be good. What would water want? What does air want? What does water want? What does fire want? What does earth want? Earth, air, fire, water. The 4 elements conspire to create conditions conducive for life. But you got to figure it out. And here in your state, you got a whole bunch of very interesting lifeboats. Some of them are entirely within the state. Some of them you split state boundaries. The notion of watersheds and artificially imposed linear, anthropocentric, ecologically illiterate lines for states and counties and cities, really quaint and keeps the tax guys happy, but water could care less about it, right? So you got to figure that out. What lifeboat do you live in? And you tell me what's the upper Clark Fork watershed look like? And you're in league with the folks. The folks in Butte are up at the stern. They're up in the front. They're on the prow of this ship, right? And you guys are dealing with it down here when you mingle with the Bitterroot over here. Obviously, you're part of a bigger one to a bigger. So understand that fractal. Like that picture I showed you of the Costa Rican rainforest tree. You're part of a fractal. Pick the scale of the fractal that you can work in, but be clear you're part and parcel with other people. As a community organizing, community building, sociology game, this lifeboat here, again, from the top to the bottom, right, side to side, every land use within that thing, if you would like to have that boat float better in the future, based on all that scary stuff I just talked about, well, the only place you get to play is how do you manipulate and modify the performance of that system as the water and the energy and the cycles and the fire and the people move through it. And resiliency, do y'all like that word resiliency? There's a whole new science. There's a neat book. Buy the book called Resiliency Thinking. You can get a PhD in resiliency thinking now. And resiliency is a state. It's a state of performance, of capacity. If you are resilient, if your immune system's good and you're feeling healthy and you're hydrated and your love life's good and your relationship with your family's good and your grades are good and you're just feeling good, you'll be more resilient to take on the various things that come your way and that try to knock you out of balance and knock you out of health. And that's what we've got to figure out is how do we get these watersheds to be resilient? And at some level, it's like, do you know your watershed? You should learn your watershed. You should figure it out. Right? Anybody read Spanish? Conoce tu cuenca. And in this case, this has exclamation points. That's not a question. That's an affirmative. Do you know your watershed? No podemos proteger lo que no entendemos. We can't protect what you don't understand. So you should figure out how to understand it. Hard to see here, but the Russian River's going through here is the coast. If anybody knows that area, Bodega Bay is down here. My little lifeboat's this purple one called Dutchbill Creek. I live right at the top of it. And it flows to the Russian and out to the ocean. And I'm part of a whole bunch of other lifeboats that are part of the big super liner of the Russian River Basin at that level. But you got to figure it out. I got some money from a local agency, a state agency, and we put these signs up. So as you're driving around western Sonoma County, there's certain ridge lines that are really different. You're driving up and over into another living lifeboat, another cradle of civilization, somebody else's container of life. And you ought to put a dang sign in here. I mean, you guys all have the... It's hard to ask this question usually when I'm in California, but since you live so close to the Continental Divide, right, come on, you all go up there and you like spit on one side and cheer for the Atlantic and spit on the other side. And where's the... this is the question for you all, as I'm a topophiliac. Right? Be clear about it. As a biophiliac, you get to be a topophiliac, one who loves topography, shape. Right? Where, it's really close to here, there's only two places on the planet that are triple oceanic divides. Where's one of them? What's it called? Triple Divide Peak. I have yet to go there, but I hold it as a pilgrimage. It's like a Mecca moment that I aspire to go summit Triple Divide Peak at some point. The other one's over in Siberia somewhere. There's only two of them on the planet that have 3 oceans that water runs off of from that single point. That's super cool if you're nerdy in this regard, right? But the beauty of it is that everybody lives in a watershed. Everyone on the planet without exception lives in a watershed. Pretty cool. Although most of y'all tend to live in pipe sheds as far as I can tell. It's either horizontal pipe sheds moving water from long distances or it's vertical pipe sheds sucking it out from somewhere else, right? Pretty much that's the way we live in a hydraulically modified system and we're monkeying with water at scale. It's worth noting, and I just leave it to you all to understand, the relationship of vegetation and the water cycle. And that forest, like I live in this country. I have stumps behind my house that are almost as big as that tree in Occidental, right? Imagine an organism that big, the highest standing terrestrial carbon biomass of any ecosystem known as coast redwood. This is insane, right? And we just completely clear cut those guys. There's a few little scraps. And y'all ain't done much better up here, right? Where's your remnant Doug fir old growth around here? Lodgepole pine, you got any left? White bark pine on the slope? A few scraps, probably, right? These things are rainmakers, they're water purifiers, they're groundwater rechargers, they're soil makers, they're recyclers. It's like forest. Deforestation has led to desertification everywhere it's been practiced over time by every culture. And read a book called Forest Journey, The Role of Wood in the Development of Civilization by John Perlin. Starts with the Sumerians. Where were the Sumerians? Sumer. Huh? In Sumeria. And where the heck is that? In present-day Iraq. Right? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And the Tigris-Euphrates Delta, one of the great water sources of that whole part of the world. And starting with those in the Gilgamesh epic, read the Gilgamesh epic, this becomes the initial wave out of there that facilitates deforestation. The Phoenicians, the Cypriots, the Cretans, the Messenians, the Mycenaeans, the classical Greeks, the Romans, the North Africans, the Moors. This book just systematically goes through culture by culture by culture. Deforest it, desertify it, dump the soil off, and bye-bye civilization. Easter Island, the Mayans, right? It's A Forest Journey, The Role of Wood in the Development of Civilization. It's a great read. It's a really fast-paced read, and it really begs the question about certain industrial forest practices. I worked in the forestry industry for a long time as a marble murrelet biologist and peregrine falcon biologist in old-growth redwood. So this is the Eel River in Sonoma County, and these are king salmon, Chinook salmon. Tasty stuff, right? And the saying goes, and in fact, there was probably some systems to pre-dam before, right? Y'all got runs of salmon up into this far up or not? How close did the salmon come here? They got stuck in Idaho before they, right? Because I know they make it. There's some main stem of the salmon and then or the snake, and then you hook up along and part of that system that comes up out of the Columbia and heads up towards the Okanagan, and right, 1,000 miles though. So imagine this critter. So it's born in fresh water. A salmon, a steelhead, a coho trout, a sockeye, a chum. Fish digs a hole, puts the eggs in the gravel. They hatch out. Little babies swim around the fresh water. They get so big, they book on down. They hang out in the estuary, get a little fatter. They don't leave. Tend to be bigger than that. And then depending on the species, in this case Chinook, they're 4 to 5 years in the ocean, getting really big. And they come back as 60, 70, 80, 140 pounders, but average 50s. And what is that? Oh, you know what that is? They spawn, they die, and in their death, they leave or are eaten by, which organisms then leave. I got to see a beautiful bald eagle today. Eagles, bears, native people, otters, raccoons, all these critters that eat these things, walk up the slope, and then, right? You are what you don't defecate, people. Think about it, right? But what you move is what? Oh, it was fish flesh in this case to my story. What's that? Oh, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, micronutrients. That's fish emulsion. Any good gardener knows, man, you grow great gardens with fish food, right? Fish is food for the gardens. So much so that when these researchers look and they sample the needle of a Douglas fir tree in a salmon stream in Oregon, 60% of the nitrogen in that needle, isotopically that nitrogen is of marine origin. 50% of the calcium from a grizzly bear bone not far from Yellowstone down in Idaho there that they went in the museum, got the bone from a grizz killed back in 1870s, sampled the calcium, looked at the isotope, 50% of the calcium was of marine origin. Half of the grizz skeleton was eating salmon flesh, coming back from the salty oceans. Life has created these nutrient return cycles that are bringing back, if you've got a connection to the ocean, where that's, for me in the coastal Pacific Northwest, this is totem salmon, salmon nation. And NPK, if any gardeners are out there, that's a 50-pound sack of 10-10-10 fertilizer right there. And they came back on the order of 500 million pounds a year at the height of the runs in the 20s. And now we're at about 15 million pounds a year in that same Idaho, Washington, Oregon, California run. 90% loss of nutrient return. The organism that I work most for is this little critter here, coho salmon. It's a coastal salmon, very finicky little princess-like fish, very fussy. And In the entire range and for the majority of the state right now, we had 500 individual adults come back in all of the watersheds of coastal California. 500, right? This critter is about to, the euphemism is blink out. Extinction would be the other word, right? And there's a really neat book if you would like to study watersheds and such. The folks in the Mattole watershed, which is a watershed near Humboldt County, this gentleman, Freeman House, wrote it called Totem Salmon. And this idea that the first thing we learned from salmon was the importance of a watershed as a unit of perception. That's an interesting thing. It's like I'm talking about physics and water and flow and size and shape. But how do we see that as a unit of perception? And I think the unit of perception has got to get it as this one, right? It's up here. It's got to start in the headwaters. It's the water in your own head that's got to get it. The most important headwaters in the system is here. And the work of the day, or my job right now, is ecosystem restoration. I'm just trying to figure out how to restore your all's ecosystem. What story do you believe? Is the planet a community or a commodity? Is your watershed a community or a commodity? Is your lifeboat up for sale or not? You tell me. Right? What storyline are you up for? Because there's a lot of storytelling and story selling going on out there. As far as I can tell, everything I turn on in that little box that has a bunch of electrons going off on it, it's hard to find a story worth listening to there, to be blunt. I don't even own one of those things. Right? And I get to be opinionated because I'm up. And we can have Q&A afterwards. You can tell me how wrong I am. But here's the deal, as far as I can tell, after all that, you got to stop using water. You just got to quit. And then whatever drop you do choose to use because you need it, because without it you're dead, then you get crazy efficient with it. So every indoor appliance you use is better be really efficient, right? All your faucets, aerators, things, low flow toilets. The fact that we even defecate in the water cycle is kind of weird. You should defecate in the carbon cycle, not the water cycle. But that's a legal question we'll get back to with legislation. Horizontal washers. I mean, even washing machines that instead of a top loader that's using 35 gallons, move it to a front loader that's using 12 gallons a load for laundry. And then all the outdoor stuff. I don't know about for here, but our data in California is 40 to 70% of water used by an average home is used for irrigation outdoors. You guys have a different regime in a winter time and this kind of stuff, but it's a lot. So whatever you can do to make your landscapes efficient. We have some really fun stuff. These folks called bay-friendly landscaping are really taking off. This is for the San Francisco Bay. And it's not just about conserving water quantity, it's also improving the quality of the water, and in doing so, conserving the energy, sending less to the landfill, right? Building soil so you can have wildlife habitat by doing it locally. And they have a whole program. You can get certified in this. They have all kinds of books and things, and it's a really robust method for the landscaping community. And maybe some of you guys might get into gray water systems where you could take like your washing machine, hook up a little valve on it, and based on where you throw the valve, you can send the water out into the landscape into a little depression that you've excavated, and then you have some mulch wood chips in there, and you can have a little subsurface irrigation basin with trees and plants on it, and that laundry can go straight out there. Sure, you should use soaps that don't have salt, don't have boron, don't have phosphorus in them. Don't put chlorine down the drain. You should stop using chlorine anyway. Want to talk about one of the great biocides? Clorox. Who owns Brita Filter? Clorox Corporation. I'm serious. Right? So you're going to pay them to put it in, to pay them to take it out, and then you just not put it in to begin with. There's this... I'll leave that one out. Anyway, here's another type of system we do called a branch drain system. And this is like from a shower. We just cut into the pipe coming from the shower. We put in a three-way little valve here that allows us to put water out to the landscape when we want to, or switch it and make it go back to the normal landscape. So if it's cold and it's freezing and there's snow on the ground and you don't want to, then send it to the city. But there might be a lot of times when you want to keep it around, depending on your soil and all that. And it's a different kind of a system. I'm not going to get into design. I could talk more tomorrow at the farm if people want to talk more design details. In this world, we call low-impact development. Do y'all talk about this, LID, around here? Does that acronym get used in Missoula, stormwater world? should check it out. Right? We have the Federal Clean Water Act, and I don't know what Montana's state water stuff is. In California, we have something called the Porter-Cologne Act. And water quality, you got to protect, and you can't just trash it. And there's point sources, which is the pipe coming out of the factory with the orange water. That one, different communities dealt with better or worse back from the 70s on. But the non-point source pollution, which is all the little bitty fine stuff coming off parking lots and dirt roads and ag fields and ranch operations and mine tailings and that kind of stuff. So there's a whole world of, look that up on the web, low impact development, and there's just a bazillion web pages that talk about best management practices. And I'm just interested in do you perceive that you live in the drain age, the age of draining it, where you're just going to have a hardscape, an impervious scape that basically desiccates and dehydrates and drains away. If you'd like to know more about the best book going right now is this one here, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands by this really good friend of mine, Brad Lancaster from Tucson, Arizona. He's got volume 1 and volume 2. And these are drawings from his book. Or do you live in the retain age, where you begin to rethink and retrofit for rehydration because you see water as a solution, not a pollution. And so is stormwater in your mind a problem? Because if it is, you'll pave pipe and pollute it. You'll plow pipe and pollute it. And that's the existing infrastructure we've mostly inherited. But if you see it as a solution, you'll slow spread and sink it. Thankfully, under the Federal Clean Water Act, as those rules are being promulgated in my state, it's our Regional Water Quality Control Board. If you're developing more than an acre for a commercial site, you have to catch, contain, retain on-site 85% of all water that falls on that site. There is no make it go away, put it in a pipe anymore. That's just flat out illegal. So again, I'm not giving you a futuristic notion here. These things are well out the gate and have been for a decade. Because ultimately the question is where's a way? Has anyone been there lately? Do I need a visa to go there? Passport to go there, away. Anybody want to tell me, right? Because you live on a side, we throw it away, it goes away, right? It's like, nah, ain't no away. Right? You're not going to get away with that one. Oh, right? And hopefully you all aren't facing this reality check as far as the depth of groundwater, but in many, many, many communities all over, their groundwater is just going away. It's getting lower and lower because they got too many straws in the creek. You pave over imagine groundwater is a piggy bank. And there's that little slot you're going to put deposits in. But you pave over the slot with asphalt, right? And I'm not going to argue tonight with whose ass is at fault for the stuff, but you did it nonetheless. You put it over the top. So when it rains, it runs off, floods your neighbors, reams out your creek, and dehydrates the system, and no water went in the piggy bank. And then you put more straws in there, and you keep sucking harder, and the piggy bank goes away, but you ain't putting nothing in. It's called hydrologic bankruptcy. It's pretty dang simple. Overdraft of groundwater is the technical term. And many communities, there's parts of the San Joaquin Valley that from the 20s to the 50s, the entire valley sank 20 feet because it's floating on a bed of water. Mass subsidence. I was chatting a little bit with folks today. It sounds like you all have a pretty good groundwater scene here. Count your blessings on that one if that's the case. But this woman is the woman I went to China with, Betsy Damon. And this notion that if water is the foundation of life, then it must be the foundation of design in the built environment. It's kind of my point I was making earlier. What would water want? If you can redesign agriculture and grazing and forestry and urban and suburbanization based on what would water want, keep water happy, you might have your chance at sticking it out is amplified. So a couple thoughts here. One opportunity that a lot of us in the area that I'm living at in the Southwest, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Hawaii, all of the Caribbean, most parts of Australia are doing is looking at our roofs as above ground wells. You're going to catch water off the roof, run it through here, there's some filters and things, put it in a tank, and then depending on what you do with it, if it's outdoor irrigation, there's probably not much left to do with it. If it's for indoor potable use, then there's probably some carbon filters and some UV light and stuff to make it potable. Easy, not hard. Pretty simple calculation on this thing. This is the only numbers I'm going to really give. I gave you the acre foot thing earlier, so this is the second set of numbers. 1,000 square feet, you put an inch of water on that 1,000 square feet, and 600 gallons comes off that surface. So just hold that one if you want to figure it out. Really cool thing. Where I live, I'm getting 60 inches of rain a year, but it comes in 3 months. So I get a ton of water in a short period of time, and then I got a long dry season. So our tanks tend to get big because you need a big piggy bank to grab it up when you got it and hold it so you can meter it out for a long period of time. This is a 27,000-gallon handmade ferro cement tank. That's all the water supply for my friends over here for their entire family of every drop they use off their roof. It's off a steel roof, which is high-quality water. There's no toxins coming off that roof. It actually has 5 kilowatts of photovoltaics. So they make all their electricity for their home, they heat all their water, and they catch all their drinking water off the same roof surface. Super good, right? And this is the mantra for me where I come from. We don't live in a water scarce area, we live in a storage scarce area. I think it's your alls too. Everybody in the West. Beyond the 100th meridian, read John Wesley Powell's work. Beyond the 100th meridian, John Wesley Powell, the founder of the U.S. Geologic Survey, argued that we should rethink Westward Ho land settlement from the East Coast summer wet season into a watershed-based delineation, and 40 acres and a mule wasn't going to cut it. And he's got some eloquent writings in the late 1800s on this. Study them up. Somebody's probably got an environmental studies history class y'all do around here or something. This is my goat shed for our milking goats that we put them out that they loaf in. So I've just got 160 square feet of roof. It's a single shed. I'm going to put a drain pipe on here. I'll show you in a second how it's attached. And that goes to a pipe. So I just took a standard flexible drain pipe that's solid. If anybody's ever put drainage in, you can go buy it at your local hardware store. Super cheap. Slice it. Follow the seam. Slide it over here. Slip it on. Wire it onto the edge of the roof. In the case of where it hits the tank, inside there, I have a super expensive little onion sack as a filter on the end there. I got 2 years I got oak trees all over the system. There's this much leaf on the roof, like leaves and mulch up there, which is not good for fire, but as far as the water's fine. And there's only like 20 leaves that got through. This is an incredible filter on the leading edge. And then it gravity feeds, and all my chicken water for the last 3 years of the system operating, it just comes off the roof, filters out the leaves, goes in a tank, and the chicken water has a passive float switch, and when they drink it, it pulls water without electricity or anything and keeps them topped off, and I've never had to touch that system. I don't provide water. I'm not digging a well. I'm not pumping it. It's just off the roof. Super simple, right? We've been doing a lot of these in urban areas now. You're going to have to get a lot of people to help you carry it over the fences to get it in the backyard, and lots of interest increasingly in urban areas to do this. Some folks are starting to pair up and called daisy chain together, 55-gallon drums. Storage is the most critical piece, and it's the most expensive piece. It takes up the most room. It's the hardest piece. But lots of folks are into it, and this is a project that I worked on with these folks from SPAWN, the Salmon Protection and Watershed Network in Marin County. So they take this outdoor school lunch shed at an elementary school, take the water off of that into this tank, a 30,000-gallon tank. It's a steel tank with a potable plastic liner in it. And then all of that water is used for their 1-acre organic vegetable garden. It was paid for by the State Water Resources Control Board on behalf of Coho Salmon Restoration because it's getting them out of the creek in the dry months so that they're not taking water from the creek so there's more flow in the creek for the fish. Because we got a ton in the winter, but there ain't much in the summer, and the creeks grow dry, and if you got a straw in the creek, fish are not happy. So store the winter water. So the state's on board with this, and then the feds are on board with this. And we worked up this poster recently for a big workshop that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the federal partner that manages the Endangered Species Act for salmonids. We're looking, this is a big map of the state of California, and obviously the blue stuff is our best water resources, and these guys are hurting down here as far as colors go. And it's just trying to figure out how do we use these roof water harvesting techniques for saving fish. They're putting lots of money into it. So much so that a big project we did is in a little town called Bodega right near where I'm at. And the feds just gave us $1.5 million. We're going to roof water the entire community to get them out of the creek. We're doing the fire department with $40,000. We got one ranch going to $70,000. and we put this tank in, which is 240,000 gallons of underground water off the roof of this dairy barn to get him entirely out of the creek. We're just going to move the whole community out of the creek during the critical dry months on behalf of in-stream flows for fisheries. And the rancher's happy because the water quality off his roof stored underground is way better than what he's sucking out of the creek with all the nutrients and the other stuff people are putting in it upstream. So he's happier, the cows are happier, the fish are happier, the creek's happier, everybody's happy.
You have to replace the roots, I know a lot of roots have toxins in them.
In every one of these cases, you have to do an evaluation of water quantity and water quality with respect to the rainfall, the roof material, the gutter material, the tank material. All of those things have to be considered. An asphalt roof would have you, the precautionary principle would make you think harder about that than a painted steel roof. So yeah, you're on the right trajectory. But I'm not going to unpack the details, but go girl, go. Right? This is a little baby coho salmon. He's really this big in life, right? But I like seeing him 8 feet across in here. So we're working hard on that critter, but this is what my lifeboat, this is soil, dirt dumping out into the Russian River after the first rainstorm. Where I come from, we have really good growing conditions, right? If it was intact, it's 800 years to make an inch of topsoil by natural processes. So if you're dumping that much dirt out of your lifeboat and you're expecting to have a food system, a food policy system that's going to feed you, the last thing you want to do is dump your dirt in the creek. That's the last thing you want to do, right? So even if you weren't concerned about the fish. And so these folks, so I'm going to go give a talk for them next month in New Mexico. I just like their watershed principles a lot. I think if you applied these principles to your lifeboat and you basically protected and expanded moisture storing areas in the landscape, stabilized the active erosion, prevented further degradation, restored the dispersed flow and increased the infiltration to every opportunity, cultivating this restorative plant communities that build soil, and creating site-specific solutions using natural forms and processes. Building soil, if you increase the carbon content called humus in soil, that's carbon sequestration. The greatest opportunity we have is to engage with our active arable soils, grassland, ranching, intensive, extensive agricultural soils, and increase the percent bulk volume of carbon, humus, in those soils as a process of carbon sequestration. But you got to bring the water to the soil, then bring the plants to the soil, that photosynthesis, and then pump the carbon in the ground. It's going to be the cheapest and easiest and improves all the benefits to the soil and improves your food security resiliency while we're mitigating climate greenhouse gas emissions. It's the most win-win-win thing you could meet, right? Lots of data on this. There'll be a whole conference in New Mexico in 2 weeks that we're all going to. It's all about climate change and soil, water, carbon. It's carbon sequestration and ranching. It's fixated on ranching, which I'll talk about. I dig a lot of these things. We dig a ditch on the contour, right? Water seeks its own level. So the surface water comes down. It's running off. It hits this ditch. It slows down. It spreads out, and it sinks back in. This little 70 feet here of what we call contour infiltration trench, for me in an average year, because I have a 4-inch pipe here draining water from the upslope, I get an average of 400 to 600,000 gallons of water infiltrated into my local groundwater. Versus what was happening is it was eroding a huge gully and dumping dirt and eroding my land away and washing it down, killing salmon. And it's basically, I got people who come to my land to pay me money to teach me to dig ditches on my property. Permaculture, we call it stack functions, right? So these folks, they all get an A in class. We develop a device that's called an A-frame. It's just 3 sticks, a string, and a rock. It's a mobile 2-footed plumb bob. And if you know how to calibrate it, you can lay out a exactly on contour level line on any slope and then excavate that thing either with a shovel or I'm currently doing some with a backhoe at our place right now. Amazing way to intercept the water. You plant the water, then we plant the vegetation. If you don't get the water in the ground, at least where I come from, you ain't going to grow plants. And you guys kind of, I think, are in the same boat, right? This is us just taking the road ditch. We got straight water running down here. We're just going to add crenellations into it, add sinuosity and retention, infiltration, sediment, sequestering basins to the road ditch. In the forestry realm, as you all probably know, when your forest burns, then the whole thing burns, goes back to the ground, first rainstorm, and what goes in the river? It's not pretty, right? So we did not want our forest to burn down, so how do we link that carbon that's standing, that's all messy here? See that tent there? There's a little tent. So we limbed and thinned and opened this up. We're not getting rid of the forest, we're just rearranging the fuel load, and then we're taking that material and we're putting it in these big gouged gullies that are bleeding dirt. So we take all of the fuel load, improve the fire resiliency of the forest by hand, putting it into the gullies, stopping the erosion, increasing the groundwater table, sequestering all of the sediment. So now we have a fire resilient, water resilient, soil resilient, salmon friendly system, right? We're just moving through. We did 20 acres of this in the last 10 years at our place, and we got funding out of the federal government on a Partners with Wildlife grant for it. So there's support. And again, in my realm, it's like totem pileated woodpecker is the arbiter of are we doing a good job or not. Pick the charismatic organism that holds your feet to the fire of are you doing a good job. If they're happy, then you're happy. Pick something that has a feedback loop that's efficacious to evaluate the job you're doing. I get to work a lot in rangeland stuff, and my mantra these days is rain-fed, not grain-fed. It's the real rangeland management. Think like a watershed. Let's move these animals on the land. If we understand holistic management, and it's about numbers of animals versus time on the land, rotational disturbance regimes, we can get cows to mimic bison in a system and actually improve the biodiversity, the water holding capacity, the carbon sequestration of the system. And for sure, right, in watersheds we talk a lot about it's a multi-stakeholder process. Everybody's got to be involved. Well, I'm down with that. It's just I call it multi-stakeholder because I love a good grass-fed burger, right? So if we can bring the critters back, then I don't have an omnivore's dilemma. No herbivores, no fire or no flood, no grassland anywhere on the planet. Grassland ecosystems are disturbance-dependent ecosystems everywhere they occur on the planet. And if you think like you're going to say, oh, we're going to buy this up and get those evil cows off and put a fence on it and preserve it, and at least in California, it'll go to shrubs and bushes and trees, and all our prairies have gone away with the lack of disturbance. So I'm not saying... So it's about the proper amount. There's overgrazing, there's undergrazing. What's in the middle? We got to figure it out.
Do you have a position on rotational grazing in riparian areas?
I do. The answer is it depends. But it's a timing, intensity, frequency game. So there may be, depending on the condition and width and composition of species in your riparian system, you may be able to allow certain numbers in for certain periods of time within a certain season and not. And I'm all about it, and we've done, we meaning the local RCDs with the state money on Fish and Game, have done riparian fencing for riparian pasture on 1,000 miles of creek in our country. And there's a regulated interface with the riparian system. So the cows don't just get to hang out in there 24/7 whenever they want, 365.
Are you doing a rotational grazing system through the riparian area, or is the fencing to keep all of your...
The fencing keeps the cows out until you choose to open the gate and let that many cows come in for as long as you want them in to do what you want them to do, and then they go away. And they're just four-legged lawnmowers that are working it to the degree you, as the rangeland manager, have evaluated the prescription of using this organism as part of your vegetation management regime.
So you've been able to get that into where it's okay by the government to be able to do that?
Sure.
Because I know the Australians are allowing 4 days per 30-day cycle. But all I've been able to find out in the United States is just you're not allowed to do it at all, to stay out.
Yeah, we could unpack the details on this more because it's probably more than I should go into where I'm at the time. But it's a regional-based process, and it's site-specific. And what a brittle dryland interior Great Basin system looks like versus a coastal riparian-dominated wet system looks like versus a high-elevation alpine system versus right? So, yeah. This is a guidebook we've recently written. We have 2 of these out there now. You can get it on the web. It's a downloadable PDF. It talks about homeowner and landowner's guide to beneficial stormwater. And it's just page after page after page of best management practices, how-tos, cross-sections, drawings of how to do a bunch of this stuff I'm talking about. So what is it? You know, we look a lot in the urban area, sort of moving out of the broad rural and extensive systems into the more highly intensively engaged systems. A lot of what's happening in areas like Portland and Seattle is they're narrowing the streets by adding in these little intrusions that have a curb cut out, and they're sunken, they're concave, not convex, so they receive water, and they're planted with a vegetation community that can handle its feet being wet for 3 or 4 months out of the year. They're biofilters, bioswales, rain gardens, look those words up, and they're running the water through. So what we're getting is less runoff from the roadscape, tree line systems keeping it cooler, biofiltration, better sidewalks, slower traffic calming systems. Right? I mean, China's deep into greening their streets at this point, as far as I saw recently. No. This here is a pipe coming from a parking lot. So over here would be a parking lot for 60 cars. All that water runs off of there, goes through the pipe. It normally would have just gone to here to a pipe and out to the Willamette River, in this case in Portland. The Columbia and Willamette get together. In this case, we're in the Willamette. And the factoid as of about 5 years ago is that every 8 months in the lower 48 states of the U.S., there's 10.9 million gallons of oil that goes into our creeks just from the oil in parking lots that drips out of your drain and is mobilized when it rains and goes to the creeks. 10.9 million gallons every 8 months. Now, how do we redo that number based on the 200 million gallon gusher in the Gulf? Because that factoid used to be that's an Exxon Valdez oil spill. Exxon Valdez did 11 million gallons. So we're basically saying we have an Exxon Valdez oil spill every 8 months in the lower 48 from parking lot oil alone. But that kind of sounds small when you're talking about 200 million in the Gulf, huh? So this system here, all that oil, all the copper in your brakes, every time you put your brakes on, you shed copper. Copper in the water at parts per million disorients salmonid systems, their olfactory system, like really intensely at a part per million of copper. And every time you put your brake pads on, you're shedding copper. We have new laws in California that require manufacturers to have less copper in the brake pads. This will be coming your way soon. Even though I know we got the copper from you guys just upriver. Thanks for, you should have left it in the ground. We didn't need it in the grader, but okay. So here's the deal. This system of plants is a biofilter. If that soil is full of fungus and bacteria and carbon and it's open and it's loose and it's got plant roots in it, when the oil comes down out of the parking lot and runs through this system and slows, spreads, sinks, the fungus in there are like, bring it on. Fungus, they love hydrocarbons. Oyster mushrooms, they eat hydrocarbon, carbon-hydrogen bond. Snip the bond, you get energy out, right? Carbohydrate. They take hydrocarbons and convert them into carbohydrates through a fungal mycofiltration, mycomushroom process of a saprophytic fungus, a wood-decomposing fungus like an oyster mushroom. So this isn't like portobellos and mycorrhizal fungus that are attached to tree roots. These are the wood decomposers. Oysters are the best. And they're being used all over for these mycofiltration processes to eat that oil up. Seattle, straight street, failing storm drain, bad parking, no sidewalks, kids ain't playing, mom ain't happy, right? And then you got that house, same deal. Wiggly streets, rain garden, rain garden, rain garden, better parking, sidewalks. There's an aerial. So basically Seattle is systematically going through and retrofitting the old neighborhoods, and they're retrofitting the shape, form, following function of the performance of the street on behalf of meeting federal Clean Water Act and Federal Endangered Species Act requirements, regulations for salmonids, by getting rain garden, rain garden, rain garden, rain garden, rain garden, right, all along, wiggly, wiggly, slow it, slow it, slow it, better parking, all of that. And guess what? This neighborhood that's been done, those houses were marketing 4 years ago, 10 to 12% more on the appraisal rate than the neighborhood that hadn't been redone because it's a nicer dang neighborhood. So the real estate agents are happy, the trust companies are happy, the locals live there happy, the water quality people are happy, the fish are happy, the kids playing soccer in the street are happy. All we did was change the form based on what does water want. Right? It's this is the stuff. It's a full retrofit. Rethink rehydration. Can you eat stuff? It depends on your confidence in how bioactive and engaged that soil food web would be. I wouldn't tend to be eating root crops out of there or leafy greens per se, but I'd eat fruit, apples, I'd eat fruit off of the trees. But I'm not probably going to get in there and eat roots out of the ground and stuff, unless you are really confident about, you know what's going in that stormwater and you've sorted it out. So it's not to say no, but it's the same question as the roof, the precautionary principle. I know, I'm like jabbering. Quick in LA here. So LA, go to Sun Valley Watershed. Community down there, they get an inch of rain, their school would be under 2 feet of water. Low-income Hispanic community just happens to be, right? And environmental racism is alive and well, and don't lose sight of that. Social justice, climate justice is something I spent a lot of time doing. And this community came together and said, we would like something different. The Army Corps said, we'll pay pipe and make it go away in the Los Angeles River for $60 million. And they said, no, you won't. We want new ball fields. We want to improve the ball fields. We want green space. We want daylighted trees. We don't want the flooding anymore. And we want local water supply. So they systematically dug up the ball fields. They put in these massive underground chambers. Then they put the ball fields back on and under parking lots and ball fields. So the stormwater goes through here, down there, fills up in the chamber during the storm event, and then leaks into the aquifer, recharging the aquifer. So they're now decreasing their dependency on imported water from the Colorado or the Sierra that's becoming less and less available. Lake Mead's going to be dry in a decade at the rate things are going, right? Don't tell anyone in Las Vegas, but, right? Track the bathtub ring on that lake right now where it's headed. And so they got rid of the flooding. They got local water. They got more ball parks, daylighted creeks, green space. And guess what? They spent $100 million up front, $40 million more than the $60 million that Army Corps wanted to make it go away, and they're going to save $400 million in overall utility benefits to the community in 20 years. If economics is all you think about, then you're going to go here. They've done 6 of these projects now throughout. This would be Santa Monica Bay, Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, if you can see that map. They've done 6 projects. Per inch of rain on the 6 projects, they're putting 3.5 million gallons of water in local groundwater supply per inch.
Where is the Ocean Charter School? I'm from Santa Monica.
I don't know exactly. If you just look that up, go to treepeople.org's website, and they have a map of all. I don't know the street address on it.
Oh, all right.
Right. This is San Francisco. Can you all see that thing? It's so washed out. If you know San Francisco, it's a long peninsula, and if you were looking north, you would see the ocean on this side and the bay on this side. If you took a cross section through it, it's a two-way challenge, right? It was light, and then we just got an extra strong bulb on that thing. So if you sliced it, before it was ocean, lakes, dunes, creeks, wetlands, bay. This is currently how it looks after it's been paved, piped, and polluted. And their vision, this is a slide from the San Francisco Public Utility Commission. This is the vision they're going for, is to retrofit the performance of the entire city because they have a combined sewer stormwater. Whenever it rains, all that water goes in the same place that you flush your toilet water, and if it rains really hard, then fresh brown trout are floating down the curb, right? And so they have to get it out, and they're rethinking the entire city. And here's a lovely little bucolic view of Seoul, Korea. That's what it looked like a decade ago, right? They just pulled the whole dang freeway out and are bringing back the creek because a living river is an amenity that it appears to me y'all have the Clark Fork here. It's a better place to be if it's healthy, right? Look at this nasty, stinky, rancid, putrid canal in China. His friend John Todd, look him up, put a floating dock with these little baskets on here filled with lava rock and plants and pumps, and they just pump the water through these linear livers. Living rivers need livers. And now you have a linear walkway garden park that biofiltered the entire canal, and within 1 year it was clear water to 6 feet down with not a smell to it. Right? Biofiltration, we can do this. And here's a 6-acre park that I worked on or went and helped with a redesign on in China, in Chengdu, China. Take the river water, settle it in a system that settles it out here, run it through these things called flow forms here, run it into these biofilters here, and at the other end of the park, you get pure water, and the kids are playing in it. It's the most widely visited park of a city of 11 million people in China, and it was just straight river water upstream after it went through that process. So we can do this to your swimming pool. We could put a living liver in your swimming pool, biofilter like that, get rid of the chlorine in this thing, have edible cattails and bulrush and wasabi root and taro root and water chestnuts if you don't get enough frost for you all to have to do in a greenhouse. And then you could swim in a chlorine-free pool. You could put a freshwater prawn in there, right, a crawdad-like thing. You'd be swimming in there all styly-like, chlorine-free, grab that thing up, come up sashimi style, grind some wasabi poolside, right? Fill it up off your roof, sheet mulch the lawn, put in a food forest, and as the Chinese saying goes, with water in the well and food in the land, what need for king or government have I? Homeland security, home water security, backyard, front yard by front yard. Keep your eye on the prize, people. Don't lose sight. It's a beautiful world. And now you tell me, are you part of the solution or part of the precipitate? Can you precipitate the change that's needed? It's up to you. Be clear about it. Water use planning and land use planning are the same thing. Get on local boards. Get involved in who's making the decision about what's being built where and how it performs. And step up to the mic if you need to and participate in democracy. Totem salmon deserves its day in democracy as well. If you don't participate in democracy, you'll get freedom. It's spelled F-R-E-E-D-U-M-B, freedom, right? So invest in your solar power, which is the power of your soul. It's a solar-powered revolution here. Starts with the sun and it starts with you. And then you're going to figure out with a conservation hydrology, receiving, recharging, retaining, releasing, resilient retrofit that in my case keeps the creek clear, cold, and copious for coho. And so I leave you with my slow water manifesto here, right? From the headwaters, you say slow it, spread it, sink it, but you got to think it. And that's all about brain water harvesting. We got to do brain water harvesting first before we get to rainwater harvesting. And I thank you for hanging out. So my question for you all to write down is, what 3 things do you think you could do in your life to improve the resiliency of your local watershed? 3 things you can do in your life to improve the resiliency of this watershed you live in. Clark Fork or Bitterroot if you're over there, wherever you live. And you're supposed to give that over here to Vicki. While you're doing that, I'm happy for whoever would like to hang out and chat we can get into more Q&A and such. I should have just kept rolling.
I wanted to ask, what are those things called that were put underneath the baseball field?
There's a whole bunch of names for them, but generally they're known as stormwater infiltration chambers. Infiltration chamber, if you look that word up, stormwater chambers, there's many designs. In that case, they're porous on the bottom. Different from the tanks we use to fill off the barn to hold water in the dairy that we're using to pump back, even though those were underground. It's still storage, it's just being stored in that case, an alluvial aquifer that's designed to hold water in it. Or it's not designed, the soil conditions are more conducive to that.
So there's no negative impacts of storing that much water like under that ranch that you had?
This is a great question. I love this question.
Altering the system in a different way.
So what was the first infraction on the system? Putting the roof in. If we're worried about the hydrology, then by putting the roof on and creating a 100% impervious surface that converts every drop very quickly through a gutter into a pipe and sending it very quickly out to the stream, plumb straight to the stream, so that the hydrograph gets very flashy and we increase flooding. If we're worried about losing water, then every impervious surface out there is the most important violator, which is why all of the new regulations, what are known as hydromodification. This is the buzzword if you want to get into this stuff. Hydromod, that's what they call it, hydromodification. The increasing imperviousness of the landscape versus porous, pervious, infiltrative, impervious, hard. If you if you increase the imperviousness of a watershed by 1%, the receiving creek begins to show changes in its shape and go down. By 2%, we see reduced capacity to support salmonids. By 10%, all bets are off. And there's a ton of data on this. And so my response then is to say that if you're going to put that roof in there, then the responsible thing to do is actually mitigate the runoff by putting it in a tank, offsetting the discharge, and then by having in that tank, you offset once again your demand for water in the dry season when there isn't water in the creek, in our case, in the Mediterranean system. So we get a double benefit for the buck. We improve stream channel health by delivering less water to the creek, not down cutting. We reduce flood risk downstream by reducing that volume, and we store water there of higher quality that improves stream flow in the dry season. So the way it's all penciling out right now is it's absolutely the way to do it. If you can't store it, then the move at least is like the one thing I showed, that rain garden where it had the pipe and all the little plants and such, is at least run it through a big spongy filter, a shock absorber, that biofilters it, cleans up the pollutants, the toxins, settles those out, and maybe that water then gets to the river an hour, a day later, 2 days later, cleaner than it would have being directly piped to there, so that the rate at which the creek rises and falls doesn't become so spiky. Do your systems, do you call your creeks get flashy here? Do you get, I mean, so much of your, see, because we don't have, where I come from, we don't have the snow as part of our precipitation cycle. I mean, they do in the Sierras, but not in the coastal zone. So when I can get 12 inches in 24 hours where I live. And man, the creek, huh? I know, right? So our creek goes from this to 8 feet in 3 hours. And so we've got to take that out of the system by putting a bunch of shock absorbers in. I want the water to get to the creek that fell in January, and I want it to get there in October. Slow it, spread it, sink it, seep it 8 months later. So because how does a river work? If you don't infiltrate the sponge in the uplands and there ain't nothing to leak and seep and spring out, then how does a river run here 6 months later when you ain't got nothing? Assuming that the snow melt factor in this case is, right? And 90% of the surface area of your living lifeboat is uplands and terrestrial. 10% of the surface is what you would call aquatic, visible riparian and lakes. So if you don't put it in the muscle and flesh and tissue of the watershed, soil, and let it reconnect at some point later, then you got a dry creek, dead fish. Fish need water.
So now at Occidental, do you have some demonstrations of systems where you're raising a typical person's garden without irrigation by replacing it with either woody material like hugelkultur, or perhaps with some kind of system called demonstration of polyculture, replacing irrigation or things of that nature?
So all of our woody perennial trees and things are all dry farmed at this point. All the apples and pears and peaches and plums and walnuts and kiwis and grapes, and I could go on, right? That's all dry farmed with mulch and manure, and they're just deeply rooted trees. The vegetable garden system is irrigated. Again, it's irrigated off a rainwater harvesting pond that's 100% winter filled and then passive gravity filled throughout the summer. There's no groundwater to that, so we live within our annual hydrologic budget for that irrigation system there. We've messed with some hugelkultur is a concept of an old original agricultural system where it'd be a pile of sticks and wood and debris that breaks down over time and seeds would be in it and such. We do that for gophers more than water such, to be honest with you. Put up a bunch of sticks and then put some compost in the middle and grow squash out of that, and the gophers can't get at the root. So I use that for gopher control versus a wire basket in the ground. We have half a mile of contour infiltration trenches on the property, got 6 or 8 roof water harvesting systems, half a dozen gray water systems, a series of habitat wildlife seasonal ephemeral ponds, hold water for 4 months and breed tree frogs. So you go in a salad bed right now, there's 30 frogs per bed, and they each are eating their weight in insects on a daily basis, and the garter snake population's off the charts. So we got a ton of various what I call conservation hydrology strategies operating, and they're all different. And then there's the indoor water conservation and low flow stuff and the horizontal washers and all that kind of stuff too. But we are on groundwater for the potable water. So We just put in we put 80,000 gallons worth of tanks in because our groundwater at 180 feet down right now is less than a gallon intermittently. It's not good. We don't have water where I live. But we get 60 inches a year. So 12 inches on 12 inches of that, right? And if 5 feet is 5 acre feet and 1 acre foot is 326,000 gallons, so do that 326 times 80 acres for 1 foot and then times that by 7 and the billions of gallons of water that just on my property alone, and we have a creek that takes 10 times as much land. So we got crazy amount of water for 3 months. Storage. It's all about storage.
You prefer the tanks over the ponds or something like that?
No, that each of them is a tool in the toolbox that performs a different service for the system in its location, its cost, its value. They're all different. I prefer all of them working in a collaborative, relational, what we would call stacked function relative location. Come to the permaculture stick tomorrow at Peace Farm at 11, right? And I'll do permaculture game and we'll unpack the design mantra behind this logic.
The way you showed that slide with the California, the coastal water coming from the Sierra, does Sonoma and Marin County get their water from the runoff on Tam and I guess the Burnell, or do they also from the state?
Nope, none of us in the Coast Range get any water from the Sierras where I'm at. It's all rainfall that falls within the counties and the counties in that area. We have a few big dams that are storing it up, and the fish folks aren't happy about them, and some folks aren't happy about them. But it's all local water at some level. We don't have a big pipe like the Central Valley project takes Shasta Dam and Lake Oroville and all the big dams in the Sierras and runs them through the Delta and moves the water to Los Angeles and that. We don't get any of that water. That all goes past us because we're up around the side over here.
I'm from Mill Valley, and I think Phoenix Lake is one of them, right? Like a small.
For Mill Valley, you're about 75% water that's filled in a series of reservoirs that come off of Mount Tam, and you get 25% from my watershed, the Russian River, and we steal it from the Eel River, and you got to go through Petaluma through 6. So it comes from 8 watersheds away, 25% of your water in Mill Valley, unless you're if you're up like Cascade Creek and some of those little spots. But we could talk to you. But yeah, so it's. In the drought, Marin County brought a pipeline of water from the valley over the Richmond Bridge because you didn't have the water. You'll run out of water in the next drought, for sure.
How cheaply can one of those, just a kind of homemade catchment system be implemented? I mean, is it a whole bunch of a really big investment or in thousands, hundreds, or because I'd like to see.
So your first game becomes in any system, whether it's money or water, is how do we reduce demand first? How do we reduce expenses? How do you tell me that you need the least amount of water possible? Then I can design a system backwards on my income side to provide for that. So just to be clear, conservation is the most important thing first. So then I say to myself, what's the quality of the water I need? If I'm looking for water for chickens, or am I looking for water for me? If I'm looking for water for me, then I'm going to have to be more concerned about the roof and the gutters and the downspout and the kind of tank. And I'm probably going to have to add some, what I would prefer, what we use is carbon filter. And then we have a UV light that's an electric bulb that hits it with ultraviolet to disinfect it. Carbon is for particles, that's filtration. UV light is disinfection, that's biology. You have to do both. Those are not synonyms. Filtration and disinfection are 2 different processes. So you need both if you want to drink it. So if you want to do chickens like I showed you there, you can get a shed roof with corrugated steel, cut that dang pipe. That pipe's cheap. That plastic pipe's cheap. Shove that on there, wire it up every once in a while, put an onion sack on it, and what's going to cost you the money is the tank. The tank is where the money is at. And tanks tend to run, all said and done where I come from, after you've got it, shipped it, plumbed it, fit it in, $1 a gallon water stored. You could buy one for 50 cents a gallon at the bottom end. So a 1,000-gallon tank would cost you $500. Probably you're going to end up spending $1,000 for that thing, unless you're really handy and crafty and scavenging and working the secondhand yards and things. So that's where the money's at, is the tank. And then you got to tell me, what do I want it for? And what am I willing to invest? And what does my water cost me? And if you're on a municipal system, it's already got all the pipes and pumps and things in, and you're already paying into a shared system, and the water's costing you what is perceived to be nothing. What's the water gallon here for y'all on your water bill? Do you pay for a gallon? Huh?
It's 36, a flat rate is $36 a month.
Independent of volume consumed.
That's the base rate, and then it's metered after that.
But
That also depends on and how much acres, but the thing about our water system is it's owned by, we have a privately owned water company. Our municipal water is not city-owned or state-owned. It's owned by a guy in California, and I wish I could remember his name. We don't have a complete storm drainage, so everything that goes on the surface here goes in the ground, and that's our groundwater. We're also downstream from Butte, so everything, when there's a lot of rainfall in Butte and it spill out, it comes in the river and comes down here and charge our system, so we can be recipients of that leftover copper.
So is the water quality of your groundwater, are we happy with that, or has it got issue?
That we have a water quality district, which is sort of like a county entity that's professional staff, and they regulate the storage and transport and handling of hazardous substances in the area. And they do a lot of things to protect that aquifer. It's our sole source of water aquifer.
Well, it's good. That's good. You're clear on that, because that becomes you protect that piggy bank with your life and whatever you can do with it. The other interesting thing, just to add on to that, is, for what it's worth, there's something called the water energy nexus. In California, the deal is 20% of electricity used in the state is used to pump water. 30% of natural gas is used to heat water. In the residential sector, it's actually 45% of natural gas is used to heat water. In our case, the single largest electric consumer in the state is the plant that pumps water over the Tehachapi Mountains to go to LA. And so in every gallon of water that's brought to you, pumped out of the ground, filtered, cleaned up, protected, whatever, pumped to you, pressurized, electricity, 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 you use it, flush it, it goes somewhere, treatment plant, right? Pump, pump, treat, treat, and then it's either what, discharged, or do you have purple pipe? Do you get it pumped back as recycled, reclaimed wastewater? So you haven't gotten that desperate yet, but just, the point is people do analyses of how many kilowatt hours of electricity is embedded in each gallon of water, and how many greenhouse gas emissions are associated with that is based on your electric system. How do you make electricity? And every community is different that way. And what communities trying to reduce their carbon footprint, their greenhouse gas emissions footprint, the first place they attack it is they look at the water cycle and the energy cycle, and they figure out where that all lines up. And conserving 1 gallon of water has this multiplier effect on the electricity that you possibly can save and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. Again, it may be not that big a deal for you all, but it's something that some communities are really looking into, because unless someone in the room can tell me what that is, if you've already looked at it, I'd be really impressed.
Well, that water company says that 60% of our water is going to landscape maintenance. So that's cleaning, it's using that electricity. They're also the largest consumers here from Northwest Energy. That we're cleaning up this water just in water lawn for 3 months out of the year.
In Santa Rosa right now, they'll pay you 50 cents a square foot to get rid of your lawn. It's called the Cash for Grass program. Most big cities in all of Northern California and Southern Cal are doing that right now. And the quickest way to get rid of a lawn is crazy easy. You just put a little compost on, get a refrigerator box or bicycle box, cardboard, open it up, lay it right on top of there, go get a bunch of wood chips or straw so you don't have to look at it, it doesn't blow away. And you all know if you've left a cardboard box on the lawn for too long, right? You pick it up 3 months later, and what is this? Full of worms under there, and the grass is dead. Well, you just sheet mulch the lawn, do it before the snow. Come spring, that lawn is dead, and then you can plant into it and do whatever you want, and put your gray water into there, put your storm water into there, put your perennial polyculture of your native drought-adapted plants or your other fruit-bearing, food-bearing plants. And then the deal is the charts are basically that if you use 100 gallons a day per person per head of consumptive water, like, for drinking and washing clothes and showering and that kind of stuff, flushing, in your average food budget, most of us, this is an American average, about 520 gallons of water is embedded in your daily food budget. And depending on your electricity thing, it's anywhere from 30 to 600 gallons of water in your electricity. So most people are using somewhere between 800 to 1,200 gallons of water per day if you count your electricity, food, and consumptive water. So what we call virtual water, look that up. How much water is embedded in your food? If your food is on average 1,500 miles from source to plate, then you start adding up the embodied energy, the life cycle analysis, and what you find is exporting food is exporting water. And that whole deal, so local food, on site, in season, the slow food movement. Y'all heard of that? Slow food? Slow food is an acronym, in my opinion. Seasonal, local, organic, and wild. Slow food, right? And to the degree you can do that with your limited season, which means you've got to can and store and jerky and do all that stuff to get you through the winter, right? Because you got a longer deal. But that's how Grandma did it, right? That's how my grandma's peaches are the best. I'm going to go see my granny in a couple days, 95 years old. She makes the best peaches. I love her canned goods. So go back to canning, preservation, right? Make sauerkraut, make kimchi. We got to get back. And it's all about water. I'm still on water here. Right? I challenge you to bring a subject up that I can't bring back to water. With that note, I should leave. All right. Thank you all.